Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Biz Dev Podcast, the podcast about developing your business. I'm David Baxter, your host, and I am joined today, per usual, by Gary Voigt. And I'm sad to say this is his last day of the podcast because he's about to go and join cosmetology school and open a new brand of perm-only salons. Where did you come up with that idea, Gary?
Well, I have two teenage daughters, and for some reason, all the guys in their high school that I see have perms. So I figured it's a market to tap into. You know, that big poofy front perm.
Big poofy.
Yeah.
Where they're angry at their forehead. They just no foreheads. If you're under the age of 20, you can't have a forehead anymore.
Curly poof horn.
Yeah.
That's what I'm doing.
Poof.
Yeah.
It's like a rhino, but made of hair. Nice. More importantly, we are joined by Steve Beene, who is the founder of SBeene10 Consulting. And we're going to talk more about that in just a minute. How are you doing, Steve?
Doing really well. Thanks, guys. And you?
I cannot complain.
Pretty good.
Except I'm working with Gary. Is that
so
fair?
David, are you going to be able to use his perm service?
Yeah. Oh. Look at this. He's coming in strong. Oh, man. You know, this is all just a lie. It's all just a skull cap, and I'm covering my big hair all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's more the Ronald McDonald type without that big poofy red afro.
I am too attractive with hair, so I have to remove it so that I don't cause traffic accidents. So I saw on your, I'm starting the show out a little differently because I saw on your LinkedIn profile that you are officially an expert witness, and I've never met an expert witness. So I thought I would ask you what does that mean in real life?
So
I've only seen it on TV shows.
Yeah, no, there was a case in the payments industry where a large sales organization would sell their clients, let's say it's going to be 1%, and then 6 months later they were charging them 2.5%. So there was a class action lawsuit where they were trying to get these businesses refunded for being overcharged. And they needed someone who really understood credit card processing and payments. And, you know, that was my business at MSP Consulting. So I had just left, retired. It was a great timing. And it was interesting because I'd never done something like that. And I learned a lot about, you know, how class action lawsuits work and stuff like that. So it was interesting. I'd do it again tomorrow if I could. It was fun.
Was it as cool as we see on TV with the expert witnesses, or was it more boring?
It was more boring. We were in a conference room and it was, you know, a Zoom call and I was being deposed. And, you know, you have to write a big article about all your opinions and then they tell you you're stupid while they're going through your deposition and you're wrong about everything. So it was interesting. Nice. I enjoyed it.
I saw a thing in the recent trial with FTC versus Microsoft a couple weeks ago or whatever, a few weeks ago. And the FTC brought on an expert witness who was getting paid, I think it was $2,000 an hour. And this guy basically made a career of being an expert witness. Like that's what they nailed him on. They're like, you don't do anything except talk. Like, how are you an expert? Oh, they just ripped him to shreds. But $2,000 an hour, that's not a bad living.
That's a pretty good gig.
Yeah, the opposing counsel, or the counsel that on my side, the opposing expert witness, that's his main job, was just being an expert witness for credit card payment processing, which I didn't know you could make a career out of, but that's what he did. He made a lot of money.
I bet they get paid very well, yes.
Yeah.
So tell me about SBeene10. Am I saying that right? Is that you just stuck it all together?
You are, yeah.
SBeene10.
Yeah, so it's a business. Yeah, it's a business advisory, fractional CFO, COO business. So I started it about 3 years ago. In 2003, I had two other partners. We started a payments consulting business. We operated it for 18 years. And then in 2019, we sold it to a PE firm out of Connecticut. It was a roll-up strategy for the acquiring company. So after a couple of years, I transitioned out. I retired. I had a couple of clients reach out, ask questions, go to lunch. And one of them asked me to be on her advisory board. And I was like, well, okay, who else is on it? She's like, well, you. So I thought maybe I should, formalize this a little bit. And I got in there and I probably spent 4 or 5 hours a week, mainly on her finances, just giving her a view into the business and how it flew, how money was going through the business. And I was a little amazed because it's a very successful business, but she just didn't understand what her financials were actually telling her. And so I started being kind of her fractional CFO. We created a dashboard. We talk about profitability. We talk about normal stuff with the owner. And then she introduced me to a competitor of hers, which is a friend in another market. And I became her CFO. And I've got another client in the payments industry where I'm their COO, CFO, about 8-10 hours a week. So it's a way to get me off the golf course a little bit, where I work 20 to 30 hours a week with 3 to 6 clients, just helping them on a fractional basis. And it works well for both because I don't want a full-time job and they can't afford a full-time CFO, nor do they need one. But, I can come in 4 to 8 hours a week and give them the expertise to kind of understand what's going on in the business.
So when does a company need a part-time CFO? Like we don't have one, right? We have a bookkeeper and I have a CPA who does, but I know that one of my weaknesses as a business owner is I don't understand finance. I understand, my whole business is cash only, like no debt, no nothing. I don't have inventory or anything like that, like a lot of my business friends where they have to buy huge amounts of stuff. I don't have to worry about any of that, right? My only expense I have is payroll, which is 80 something percent of our expenses, right? So I have never need that. But my business group, C12, they'll ask me, hey, what's the ratio to blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what? Right?
Yeah.
I have no idea. And so there's part of me that said, hey, I need a CFO because my wife does our bookkeeping and she's a great bookkeeper, but she's not a CFO, right? That's not her role. That's a very different role. She knows the money coming in and out, make people get paid. All that's wonderful. But when you ask, hey, how much money did this project make? She'll try, but she doesn't understand what that really means as much any more than I do. And so that's a hole for us. And so aside of my own problems, when does a company actually need to take that step? Like how big should they be? I mean, most smaller companies like mine and most of the people who listen to the show, they probably don't have one, but they might need one. But what is that tipping point, do you think?
You said some great words in there. I think one of them is the business owner kind of realizes they've outgrown their bookkeeper. So they need the bookkeeper to keep the books, but they need somebody to come in and help them with profitability analysis or some ratios or pricing strategies, break-even analysis that the bookkeeper just can't do. From a services business like yours, I typically think it's somewhere between $1 million to $2 million in annual revenue. And that's a good point. It's a point where the business can afford a fractional or part-time executive to come in 4 to 10 hours a week. But they can't afford a full-time CFO. Typically from the services side, I say once somewhere over 15 to 25 million, you're starting to say, okay, I need somebody full-time to deal with the banks, to deal with my partners, to really help me from a financial perspective. So that's kind of what I think the window is somewhere between $1 million and $20 million in annual revenue. And that's more services oriented, which is my background. As you said, I don't have a lot of experience helping heavy asset type businesses, manufacturing, construction. Mine's more on the B2B or B2C services side. That helps.
Okay. That's a good staple there. I'm trying to figure out, I hate to say this, but I'm an idiot. I understand hey, fractional CTO comes in, does some ratios, figures things out, helps you with profitability. That's a 4 to 10 hour thing. What are they doing for full time? Like when you need one, I'm not saying my company, just in general, you need a full-time CTO. What are the CFO? What are they doing all day? Like you're not constantly making ratios, right? What is their actual job?
So there's really, I think of it as three sides from a full-time CFO. They've got the FP&A, which is the analysis side, ratios, planning, budgeting. You've got the controller side that's managing spend, and then you have the accounting side that's managing the books. And you've got treasury in there, so you're managing cash flow forecast. As you get bigger, that takes up more time. They're the ones that are going to interface with all of your bank partners, your insurance partners. I've seen CFOs recently, especially in the financial sector, get into some of the sales side. Not very often, but when they're talking with other CFOs, it's nice to have that CFO presence in the room as well.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm
Yeah, I
learning.
mean, as the business gets bigger, they just tend to, a lot more things and a lot more interactions need to take place. It's more than just an annual, let's get our books together and over to the accountant. And, how much money do we have at the end of the month? It's a lot more planning, a lot more analysis, and a lot more controls on the cost spin.
One of the things one of my friends does is he uses a software package called StratMax, which he's a big company. It's tens of millions of dollars. So they're a larger company, but he's got a piece of software, but it's his people too. Like his whole business is working to create this, and it has a grid, and it's basically like the classic 4-point grid, and the axes are profitability per client, or he's got his clients as little dots, right? Profitability versus pain in the butt. And he's got a much nicer way of saying it than that, but. Yeah, and basically, like the bottom left corner are the people who don't make you much money, but they're a huge pain in the butt. And anyone who drops into that, he fires them. This is like, what are you doing? And then, of course, top right is they're easy to work with, and they make us a lot of money. Those are, of course, your dream clients. And then most people fit somewhere in the middle. And I've always thought is that something a CFO does, or is that, that's way more than just finances. That's pain in the butt is a relative term to all sorts of things.
Well, what I did with a client once when we did a client profitability analysis, we had to allocate the cost to each client. And that's where the pain in the butt side becomes, when you're allocating, I've got 8 people and 2 people focus on this one client and the other 6 deal with 200 clients. You can allocate the cost there as well. So it's greater than just a pain in the butt, but you're allocating your effort to your clients or your product as best as you can to and that's what that tool is doing. It's just trying to give you an idea of what your cost is per client. And it's the same thing we did with our profitability analysis.
It's kind of like managing Gary. It takes like 6 people to actually get him to be productive.
Yes.
And then finally we get it's like a picture with some boxes and squares on it. It takes weeks.
It trickles out slowly. I'm not
slowly is the key word. No, he's really not. It's really a problem. Gary, did you have any thoughts? I don't want to steal all the thunder here.
Well, you kind of covered it when you told me you take the analysis of how many people per client, like how many people are dedicating their time for that client. And then the chart that you were talking about, David, now, when does it come to the point where you can start to see, even if you don't do this forecasting, if you're a small business and when you're starting up and you're just taking on anybody you can, if you're a services business, you're taking on anybody you can for as much as they're willing to pay you for as long as you can while you're growing. And then when you start to hit a threshold where there's new business coming in, but you're not sure if you have the time or the people to take it on right away because of some of the older clients, legacy clients that you've had, but they might be still at a lower pricing point, or like, at what point do you evaluate that and come up with a comparison that you just told us about, where you evaluate the time and money and see what's profitable or not, or if you could make that, decision to just
I smiled when you said the question, because sometimes from a CFO perspective, they don't feel the pain that David was talking about, that, this guy's a real pain in the butt. And all they do is they see the profit side and think, oh, this guy's a great client. I think it's once you're a little more, the business is a little more established and you're generating positive net income, and you have a robust pipeline where new clients are coming in, and it gives you the opportunity to say, maybe it's not the best use of my employees' time or mine to work with X client. And you start to, to fire clients here or there. Or what we did is we'd have talks with our clients and kind of explain either, this isn't working out for us. Our team's spending too much time for the cost. And the goal is they understand and they find a new provider, or even better is they reduce their reliance on you because they're using you where they shouldn't be, where they could do it themselves, or they allow you to increase the price. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I think that the conversation that needs to happen between the business and the client, or just the analysis of getting to that point where you can tell some of these clients that you might have had for a couple of months or even years, like, sorry, man, we can't do this anymore for what you're paying us and the amount of time that we're dedicating to you. But
yeah. And so we did that in our business once we were, generating profit that we could distribute to the owners, to where we could do a little bit more than just feed ourselves. And so at that point, I think is when we did the analysis to say, okay, we've got 2 clients that are taking a lot of our time, and the profitability is not that great.
Over the last 10 years, we have fired 2 clients, and it is so painful, even though it's the right thing. It's a big relief though when you do it right. When the day they're gone, everyone on the team kind of just sighs in relief, right? Because generally, if you're firing a client, I mean, it's pretty bad. And I think it's important to note, even if you're not, like I joke that every at least service business starts, I'll wash your car if you'll pay my bill rate, right? That I don't care what I'm doing. Even in that phase, I mean, maybe you want to be a little beyond that, but putting those people into those quadrants, you don't need fancy software to do that. That's a gut check for a very long time. Like, hey, this is a profitable client. They're really great to work with. They're awesome. Put them over here. This person, I make a ton of money, but they're a nightmare. Okay, that's the bottom right quadrant, right? You're making a killing, and you're going to put up with that person when you're early on. Now, maybe later on you don't, but you're not going to fire that person now. And then it's even if you're pretty new, if you got someone in that bottom left quadrant, pain in the butt, and I make no money, dude, you got to cut them. Even though it sounds painful, like I've only got 5 clients. Why am I getting rid of one, right? That could give you an aneurysm, but it's so key. Even those guys, the hardest one was that.
I was just going to, I agree. It's just, I know as a business owner, we had such a hard time doing that.
I think the pipeline thing you mentioned comes into play.
Well, but man,
it was difficult because it was revenue. Yeah.
10 years. And I think for the first time, have a pipeline that's worth a darn. Now, maybe that's my incompetence, but like you're saying, a good pipeline helps with that. Sure. But man, when you're just getting up and running, it's really hard to make that pipeline. You don't know what you're doing. You have no idea how to get a pipeline. It's just you going out and trying to sell something. And man, and again, I'm speaking purely from service. If you have a doodad and a gizmo you're selling, things get a lot easier in a lot of ways, not always. But the hardest one to fire is the one who's really, really nice. That's that top left quadrant. They're really nice, but you make no money. That's the one that's a nightmare to fire, because every time you work on them, you're losing money, but they're great people, right? They're easy to work with. They're not demanding a lot. You just can't make any money off of them for whatever reason. That's the worst. I don't think I've ever fired one of those. The 2 we've ever got rid of were in that bottom left corner. No money, pain in the butt. But if you're in that top left, that's tough. That's tough.
Yeah, when we had those clients, the ones that weren't the nice people, the really nice clients, we just had tough conversations about increased costs.
Yeah, that's generally the increase your price so that you can move them up.
Yeah, that's what we did. I mean, and then I think some of them would leave and think they'd get a better price, and they'd come back, and others just understood and were business owners about it. I mean, if you have a business owner to business owner discussion, it usually goes pretty well. They at least understand your perspective.
Yeah. And they might not agree with it, but they understand
right.
it. And
right.
We have, the raising of prices. We have a rule internally. We do not raise prices on a client more than every 2 years. That is a rule that we have. Not necessarily new clients, but new clients might be paying different things because we're trying things out. Sometimes, the economy and the inflation and all of that, pricing's weird. Everything's more expensive. So we're trying to figure out what's right for us right now. But if you're an existing client, we have a rule 2 years. But even that's hard. Like, I have some of those clients that are coming onto that 2-year thing, and it's like I have to gird my loins, right? Because these are good clients. I don't want to lose them, but I'm losing, not necessarily losing money, but my margins are shot because their pricing is not right anymore. And that's hard. That's hard to do, but you got to do it, right? The pricing of any product is key. If you don't, your guys are getting more expensive every year if you're at least giving raises worth a darn. Right. So you've got, in our world, that's everything. So as we're increasing their rates, if we don't increase ours, what do you do? Right. And that's sure. All this, it's very close to home, but because I'm right in, I mean, our company is right in that range that you're talking about, needs a CFO. And and I feel that. I feel that pressure, all those pressures that you're talking about. Yeah, not a full time. I don't. You twiddle your thumbs 30 hours a week if you try to be full time here, but but it is important, I think, to get a feel for it. Like, what's your most profitable client? I can guesstimate that, right? But I don't know that, and that's where
for the client that we did this on, she was surprised at some of the results that because 2 of them were 30% of her revenue that she was losing money on, not profit, but revenue, because they were just so expensive to maintain. And that really surprised her. So it's just because she thought they were 2 of her best clients. And when we did the analysis and, we figured out the cost, she's just like, wow, I never would have guessed. So the other thing that was helpful for her was, her 7 or 8 really profitable clients, she could see characteristics in those clients, and she changed her marketing strategy and pipeline to go look for clients that were more profitable versus, a bunch of what we call the muddling middle, where they were just making a little bit of profit, but not a lot.
Sure.
It transformed her business. It just kind of changed of who was a good client for me, which was eye-opening to her. I mean, she was surprised. So like, wow, I didn't know that. Okay. I know clients like that.
We went through that a few years ago, something similar. Years ago, we built a lot of websites, like just regular WordPress or whatever websites. And we would work with marketing companies and stuff that they would give us their work. They would, they've sold it, but they gave it to us and we would build it for them. And we realized it was a financial thing, but it was also just the time thing, because time is money, literally in our case. And we had to make a really hard decision. We don't do websites anymore. And we do, but only for existing clients. Like, we have clients who we're building an app and they say, hey, can you build my website too? Sure.
Yeah.
No
if
problem.
It's part of an existing and ongoing project.
But we don't advertise or market that we do websites. That's just not our world anymore. But that was a big shift, because it's like, they're easy to sell, right? And when they start coming in, but the time and the effort is just brutal for us. I mean, it's great business for other people, but not for us. So we had to go through a similar process to say, gosh, okay. And we didn't fire any of those people.
Which clients and what type of clients are more beneficial for our business?
So you have been doing this only for a little while, but it's not you're trying to keep it small, right? Because you're semi-retired, which is a cool place to be.
Yeah,
that's a cool place. We've met a few people on the podcast now that are semi-retired, and I think that's a really cool thing, because they're working not because they have to, because they want to. They want to keep moving. I think that's a really cool thing. But you've had a really long, great career. I mean, Accenture and doing your own company for a long time. I mean, do you have any great stories of working in any of those big companies? I mean, Accenture, when I was a kid coming out of college, that was the place you wanted to work. As a new developer, as a consultant, there were the big 5 at the time. I have no idea how many there are now, but there were at the time. Actually, Accenture didn't exist when I was just coming out. They were Arthur Andersen, I believe. And then they turned into Accenture. I think that's right. And everyone knew if you graduated college and you went to work for them, they called it a burn and churn. They were going to make you work minimum 80-hour weeks, but you're going to learn a ton. And if you can get through that 2 years, you leave and you'll triple your salary or whatever. That was always the myth, right? But you worked there for a long time. Is that kind of how it works there?
Yeah, it's definitely a pyramid. And I have great friends from when I worked there that left after 2 years, left after 8 years. I left after 14 years. One of the gentlemen who used to work for me is still there. He's probably been there 30 years, and they've all had great careers. So I don't. My point is, I don't know what the ideal jumping off point is.
Sure.
I think it's greater than two. But it definitely people churn out, and it's just they don't want to do that much work, or they want a client says, "Hey, I've got a great lifestyle job for you," and and they jump. So the big carrot's to be partner, and I was a
Sure.
partner for a while. That was fun. I kind of learned I liked the senior manager job better because you were doing stuff versus selling stuff, and I enjoyed that a little more. Um, and then another partner and I left and wanted to kind of start our own thing in '03, and that's when we started MSP Consulting. And I was lucky in that my business partner and I both had 14 years at Accenture, so we attacked problems similarly. We had similar dialogue and communication structure and how to grow a business. So that was fun.
That is very cool. It reminds me, my nephew, who is like 26 or 27, he is in the middle of that burn and churn he's not a programmer or anything, and I probably shouldn't mention where he works. It is a massive consulting firm. And he is up in DC, got an apartment. I think he said literally 6 blocks from the White House, which from what I understand, the closer you are in proximity to the White House is one, it cost, but it's how important you are. And now he's a young guy, but he is doing things for the UN and crazy stuff. And but he works like all the time, 80, 100-hour weeks, travels all over the world. And I'm like, that's great when you're young, man. But at some point, that's just a beating. I did some of that for a little while, and I didn't last for because I was married. When you're married and doing that, you get someone at home going, "Where are you?" And that changes that. That makes that odor. What's that right word for burdensome? Quite quickly.
Yeah, we always told the joke when you first start, your girlfriend or wife knows where you're flying in from and the flight number and the time. A couple years later, they know what city you're coming from, and then after about 10 years, it's just like, yeah, he'll be home on Thursday or Friday. So it's just because there's so much travel and so much effort. My business partner and I both had little kids, so that's why we left. I think my oldest was 4 and his was 2, so it was just time to build our own business.
Since you do have the experience from building your own business as well, I'm assuming that you can carry that advice and that experience through to your current clients now. So what would be your top 3 pieces of advice for anybody starting a business or any new entrepreneurs out there?
Yeah, I think one of the first things I always tell people is understand your runway. So how much capital do you have and how fast are you burning it so you understand when you need to start generating revenue? Because I think a lot of businesses fail because they run out of cash and then the owner has to go back and get a job so he can feed his family. So just understanding, the runway, I think is critical. I think understanding along those lines, kind of the break even. And I think break even can be by a product. So, what does it cost me to build this? And what am I going to charge for it? And it could be as a business as a whole, like for ours, at what point, what were our fixed costs? And at what point did we cover those and then start to generate, profits that we could split? I think the other one is just, and this one took me a while to understand when we first started the business. I thought it just didn't make sense to me, but start with the end in mind. Understand what you want the business to be in the future, and it will help you make decisions throughout the process. And if you're planning to transition to your employees at some point, you'll make different decisions than if you want to sell the business in 2 years or 5 years or whatever that is. So, a lot of businesses don't necessarily know, but they should have that idea. And then every year assess it. Okay, what does the end look like this year? What does the end look? Because as the business evolves, I think that end point is going to change. Like for us, we had anticipated selling our business. And then about 3 years before we did, we started to get some people reaching out to us wanting to buy us. And so we've had to kind of adjust what's our end point, what's our end game for our business.
The finance guy goes right in with the know your runway.
I love it.
But yeah, how many businesses do you know where the owner's
true.
got to get a job? Yeah, because they just can't feed their kids.
There are so many startups who do that.
Yeah, we ask every guest these questions. So we hear a lot of the same kind of common answers, and which is good because then that means most people are getting good advice from us because it's common advice. So we've heard the know your runway, know your break even and stuff. You went right in first though. That's all I'm saying. Finance guy.
Well, I think it is, you cannot overemphasize the importance of cash flow. A lot of places we like, well, I've sold $1 million this year. And you're like, but I'm going to go out of business. Well, it's because, $1 million 6 months from now means nothing right now.
But I've got $1.2 million in inventory.
Yeah. I got to get paid now. And I got payroll of $100,000 right now. That $1 million means nothing. And a lot of companies don't, like when I was doing this on the side, when I was building websites and stuff on the side, there's no concept of that. And that's when it's a side hustle, you lose that. That's the first thing I learned when I went into business for myself is that time matters. When I'm doing a side gig and someone says, let's say I build Gary a website for, $1,000 and he's like, hey man, business. For his new perm business, that's right. Bringing it all back, call back there. He's like, hey dude, can I pay you next month? Sure. It's a side gig. Sure. No problem. My job is paying my bills. My mortgage is paid. It's all good. You give me that extra money that I'm doing on the side comes in. When I am I'm on my own, right? I have bills now that belong to the company. That $1,000 is now worth $500 because it got split over time. And I had to learn that the hard way. Like it was just really hard. And that's why I'm a nut about cash because I have to keep track of that. It's the only thing that makes sense to me. I don't know how people get with much more complicated business. I don't know how they sleep, but it's just, I think that's something that a lot of founders just really struggle with. And so I'm all for it. I think that should be one of the top things that every new company should be really keyed on. Well, if anybody gets in touch with you now or wants to hire a part-time CFO or anything, how would they get in touch with you, Steve?
I think the easiest way would be through LinkedIn and my profile you'll add to the show notes, I'm sure. And then my email is just Steve, SBeene10 at gmail.com. Very simple.
Nice.
Yeah, we'll definitely add those links to the show notes.
Beene is Beene.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not like bean as in butter bean. Anyway.
No.
If anybody wants to get in touch with us or ask us any questions, leave any comments about the show, you can do that below this video, or you can email us at hello@thebigpixel.net or reach out on any one of our social media platforms.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I hope it was good for you guys. I hope it's an okay podcast. Hope we met your needs.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, no, I actually learned quite a bit. I'm more on the creative spectrum or the creative side of the spectrum. And I used to freelance before I was working with Big Pixel, and the finance stuff was something that I was just too afraid to tackle on my own. Didn't understand it, got nervous about it. So I actually learned.
So I listened to about, I think, eight to 10 of your podcasts, and I never heard the Know Your Runway. So I'm really disappointed. I thought that was a great one. I was all ready. It's like, boom, I got one.
We'll give you credit when we write our book. It'll be okay.
We'll turn this podcast information
afterwards. Just let me know.
Into a blog and credit you as the one who came up with.
Yeah.
There it is.
All right.
All right. And on that note, we'll check out. Thank you so much. See you guys next week.